All right, we will call this meeting April 16th meeting of the Water and Sewer Authority of Cabarrus County to order. Looks like we have a quorum. Our State Senator Chris Meismer is not going to be with us. He's let us know that he is tied up in Raleigh. So, but we do have a quorum otherwise. So we will move forward. Do I hear a motion to adopt the agenda you have before you?
Do we need a motion to excuse him?
I don't think we ever do that. So we're good. Do I hear a motion to adopt the agenda? All right, got a motion and a second. Any discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, we will move forward with this agenda. Unfinished business. You have the March 19th, 2025 minutes in your packets. Do I hear a motion to approve those?
So moved.
Second.
A motion and a second. Any discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Those minutes stand approved. All right, we will, any preliminaries before we open the floor for a public hearing on the budget?
No, I don't have anything.
Okay, all right, well, we will open the public hearing on the proposed fiscal year 25-26 budget and see if there's anybody that would like to speak to the board on this matter. Yeah, hearing nobody, we will close the public hearing. And we will move into any discussion that might be necessary. Everybody's seen the budget. We had a discussion at the last meeting. Are there any questions for staff about the budget or any discussion you'd like to have? I'll open the floor for any of that, unless Chad, you have anything to add to that.
I don't, I think we, like I said, last time we presented, I think, a solid budget with a very, reasonable rate increase and lucky to be able to do that this year again. And so happy to answer any questions, concerns anyone has.
Okay, hearing none, we will move on. And you have before you a budget ordinance. Wendy, anything you want to say about the budget ordinance specifically?
I don't have anything to add. It just represents budget of over 28 million with paying the rate of $1.87 for the variable rate, and the system development fee fund at 3.2 million. Be glad to answer any questions if you have any.
Any questions on the budget ordinance specifically? Okay, hearing none, do I hear a motion to adopt this budget ordinance for the upcoming year?
Yeah, I'll make that motion to adopt the budget ordinance for 25-26.
Hear a second?
Second.
Got a motion, second. Any discussion about this action? Hearing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, motion carries. All right, let's roll into some new business. Evan, gonna talk to us about design service for HDR for Rocky River Rehab Project.
Sure will. So I'll be presenting on the Rocky River Sewer Rehab Design Services, and at the end, we'll be seeking approval for connecting design services to HDR. Wanted to start off by giving just a little context on how this project came to be. So in early 2024, WSACC contracted with HDR and our partnering jurisdictions to complete an I&I study. And without getting too far in the I&I study, at the end of this study, HDR compiled a list of 16 high priority solutions. High priority subbasins in context means they're the highest contributors to I&I within WSACC's collection system. So the list, there's a list of 16. The Rocky River Sewer Rehab portion is one of the largest contributors to WSACC's I&I problems. And just to give a little background on the Rocky River Sewer Rehab project, it is about 66,000 linear feet of pipeline, ranging in size from 36 to 54 inches, with some 30-inch parallel sections. So that's how this project came to be without going too far in the I&I study. I didn't want to get bogged down with the I&I study itself because it was a large effort, but just know that there's a lot of data collected and a lot of background work that went into solidifying these 16 priority subbasins. After we got this priority subbasin solidified, WSACC issued a request for qualifications for the Rocky River Sewer Rehab project. We received 3 proposals through the statement of qualifications process, and we unanimously selected HDR to move forward with this scope of work. Following that, WSACC and HDR collaborated to solidify the scope of work, which I'm just going to briefly talk about without getting too far into the tasks themselves. It's split into 8 different tasks, but to summarize them, there's a large coordination effort at the front end of this, and it's simply due to just the difficult terrain in this section. Then task 2 and task 3 are more so the field collection portion. There's CCTV work involved. There's manhole inspection work involved. Our staff, the WSACC staff, will be mainly responsible for the CCTV work just because their familiarity with the alignment. And then following that CCTV work, manhole inspection work will come to the main deliverable, which is the plans and specs. So the plans and specs is the main deliverable. We'll take these plans out to bid, and then we'll pursue the Rocky River sewer rehab portion. There's a large coordination effort that'll be happening throughout this project, but that's kind of the 1,000-foot overview for this project. We'll also be trying to secure easements or identify easements to help our interceptor staff as well. So I'm happy to answer any questions. I know that was quick, but it's our recommendation at this point to move forward with this design proposal from HDR. And questions specific to the I&I study or questions specific to the Rocky River sewer rehab project?
Do you have flow estimates for the I&I study?
We do. I don't have them off the top of my head right now. I could definitely forward them to you or get with Chad and get them to you.
Yeah, I'm just curious what that benefit looks like on a flow
Yeah.
standpoint.
It was pretty significant numbers there. I mean, the Rocky River Interceptor and Irish Buffalo Interceptor are the 2 main trunk lines that WSACC operates. So it's safe to say that in order of magnitude, probably 1/4 to 1/5 of the flow that comes to Rocky River comes down the Rocky River Interceptor. And so we can look at that. A big part of this next step is identifying kind of what are those cost-effective repairs that can be made. As I know Jeff's aware, some of the terrain that this line goes through is you see water and you see a manhole sticking out, and then you see water and then you see a manhole sticking out in a swamp like that. It's a very challenging place to access. It was a challenging place to install, and it's a place that any imperfections in the pipe is going to result in pretty good volumes. And so we definitely think this next step to really get a feel of the order of magnitude of the repairs and what are the best methods for repairs is worth it. And that's when we'll really get into that business case.
Is this flow attributed to jurisdictions? So it's like Concord and Kannapolis, are they billed for this flow currently? How do we account for the I&I?
Correct. So all flow goes through the meters and is billed out to the jurisdictions. That is correct.
So we could see a reduction in flow use for this 12-mile section, both at the plant, but also on the bill.
You could. Typically, while you're spending that year or so doing that work, every other line that's in that basin is getting a year older, and you're gaining I&I in some of those places. So it's always one of those frustrating things.
Whack-a-mole.
But I think this falls into the process of capacity. Not only do we need to be building capacity, but we need to be protecting and retaining the capacity that we have by keeping all the groundwater and rainwater out that we can, that is economically.
You don't spend a lot of money to be symbolic, but it is symbolic of the situation we're in and understanding that could play a really big role, especially prioritizing them, right? We go and check them off the list and hopefully we've done some good. It's great.
What was the cost of this one?
So not to exceed of 943,000 and change.
We are estimating with this 25%, that's our assumption right now, 25% of that 63,000 linear feet will be rehabbed.
That's for the 930. That's not for the design cost, is it?
Yes.
930?
Yes. Well, you're 11 miles of pipe that's being analyzed here. We're going to TV and do a lot of that work, correct,
Yeah,
Evan and Thomas, but some of those areas that are out in swamps and there's going to have to be some specialty type equipment brought in to do some of this. And that's where this gets costly.
Pricey.
And where's the funding for this piece coming?
ARPA funds.
So this is still part of the original amount that was going to go to Cottle Creek. That bid came in very low, Back Creek came in low, and so this is a project that we're gonna continue to utilize those funds from.
So the next agenda item is addressing that piece of it, right? Capital ordinance,
Yes, yes, correct.
which includes project and the design. So we'll get to that in a minute. Any other questions for Kevin or Chad?
And you said it was ARPA money, or I'm sorry, Kevin, you said it was ARPA money?
Yeah, we have a very strict.
Was this part of the original scope of the ARPA
No,
request?
no, it's not.
And has Diener given us permission to use the rest of this?
Yes.
For that
Yes.
purpose?
Yes, Diener's worked very well with us to allow us to do Back Creek. And then we had, what was it, Wendy, 3 million, 2 million that was left?
I have budgeted, we're budgeting 4.2, over to 4.2 in ARPA funds for this project.
Okay. So still a significant amount left.
Just know how nitpicky they are about making sure you got every little I dotted and every T crossed about your permissions to use the funds. It's just making sure we have had permission to use that fund for that purpose.
We sent applications in December and they gave us a tentative agreement, you know. You have to turn in everything and get approval along the way, but we've taken the first steps.
So we need to get started because there's deadlines involved.
Correct. Correct.
Okay, any other questions about the design work? Okay, do I hear a motion to approve and award that engineering design services to HDR for the Rocky River Rehab Project?
So moved.
Second, any discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Right, Maybe you want to walk us through the capital project?
Asking approval to set up a capital project fund for the Rocky River Sewer Rehab Project. And like we've just talked about, basically I'm just moving money from Lower Cottle Creek to this project, money that's left over. We have a good problem. We can't seem to spend the money. Everything keeps coming in under budget. So like I said, we're allocating a little bit over $4.2 million of ARPA funds for this project. And then there's also some FDF fees that were allocated in Lower Cottle Creek, and I'm just transferring them over because they won't be needed in the Lower Cottle Creek project. So no additional funds, just moving it from one place to another.
Is this the kind of project that will be, we kind of build to a scope and may or may not use all this money, or will we? I mean, will we do it? Is this, how do you intend to?
Sure.
We don't have a budget. I mean, we have a budget, but we don't have a project yet.
Yes, sir. So we work with HDR as part of the I&I study to provide some very preliminary scoping for this effort with some assumptions. So one of those assumptions, like Kevin mentioned, was that we would rehab about 25% of that line. We may find more that needs to be done. We may find less that needs to be done. That's just their general assumption based on their work in other areas moving forward. So these are all estimates, kind of preliminary from that effort at this point. As we move forward, we'll have a lot more definition to that.
So I guess we'll just park this money here until we have a scope and get in the middle of the project. And
And this is the budget that we turned into the state for their approval.
but there could be a scenario we have leftover money still, potentially. Hopefully not, but
No.
no, okay. Don't spend it all.
We expect
Doesn't-
this is a difficult area.
Let me ask the other question. Are we gonna need to add more money to it? Potentially.
Potentially.
Okay.
Maybe.
Okay, all right. Any questions about the capital project ordinance? Do I hear a motion to approve it?
Did you have the total project ordinance amount? I was looking for that.
5.5,580,000.
Finally got to it down here.
Okay, got a motion to approve the project ordinance. Do I have a second? Second. Second. Any discussion? All in favor, say aye. Opposed? The motion carries. Thank you, Wendy. Okay, Chad, going to have sort of an open discussion. Chad and I've been talking about sort of some big picture things, and we thought it would be good to give the board sort of an update on sort of our facility, long-range facility plans, and sort of how that meets our needs going forward. And there's more to come on this, but I thought it was good for staff to give us sort of a primer on where we're headed and start to have some good discussion about just big picture. What are we staring at, you know, in the next several years, and start to figure out what's the best game plan for meeting our needs. So
Well,
I'll turn it over to you guys.
Well, I've been coming to the board for several months now, saying we're going to have some big decisions coming here in the future, as the results of the facilities plan starts coming out and kind of the rubber starts hitting the road. The plan right now is that next month, George will be here, for Brown and Caldwell, going over some of the results and alternatives that are going to be available and options we have to move forward. What I wanted and hoped to accomplish this month with this discussion was to kind of get everyone primed and what to expect. We love George to death, but George gets up there with this PowerPoint, and I don't want everybody to be the wheels just to get spinning and trying to process what all is going to be coming and what's going to happen. We really have got several big things that we're going to have to focus on. We have the master plan data. We have the flow information where we're at now. We kind of have our backlogs of what type of projects do we have that are out there that we're interested in, that are interested in locating here in our jurisdictions. And you know, we've kind of identified that we probably, our next step over the next 10 to 15 years, we probably need something in the 7 to 10 MGD range of additional capacity, something in that order of magnitude. There's two big things we need to figure out, and we need direction from the board, is what's the level of service that we want to provide? You know, what is that buffer we want to have and maintain, where we have our flow is 22 million gallons a day. Our developer control capacity is 3, so 25 million gallons a day is tied up between flow and developer control capacity. What's the buffer we want of capacity that we have available to provide out to projects? You know, what is that level of service we want to provide? And the second being, how do we get there? At the request of staff, and I think at direction of the board, Brown and Caldwell is going to be bringing quite a few alternates to do this, ways to get to that 7 to 10, 11 MGD. That's going to involve new plants in different locations. It's going to involve smaller expansion at Rocky River, big expansion at Rocky River. There's going to be a lot of ways to get to where we need to be. But we kind of have to stay back and remember, we need that 7 to 10 MGD of capacity, something in that order of magnitude. How do we do it? That's really what's going to come in. And then how aggressive do we get on the timing for doing that? When we talk about the level of service, the buffer that we want to have in capacity to hopefully avoid being in the position that we've been for the last 4 years. So that's really going to be the big kind of discussion and trigger items that we're going to have. We've got to keep in mind 7 to 10 MGD of capacity, $30 to $40 a gallon. We're talking $200 to $350 million here. You know, that's what we're talking about numbers wise here. So it's big money, it's big decisions that are going to have to be made. And so that's why I really want to make sure that you all are feel very well prepared to process that and to make those decisions. And probably more importantly, that ask the questions that need to be asked to facilitate the discussion to where we get to where we are. So Thomas, that was a lot of rambling, but Thomas has a short presentation. We're going to start kind of basic here, back to the history of each of the plants, kind of how they've grown. And we're going to kind of go through a little bit of that pretty quick. Thomas has got a few maps and a little bit of information on what's being considered as alternatives. And then we're going to have whatever discussion you guys want to have on this and proceed through this. So Thomas, I'll turn it over to you.
Sure. And as Chad alluded to, I have a little bit of background here. My font's changed up on me. I apologize for that. These are a little harder to read. But as far as the Rocky River plant is concerned, the original plant was built in the late 1970s as a 24 million gallon per day plant. All the way, from there to the late 90s, we did receive apply for and receive an MPDES permit for 34 MGD at that point. So that is the permit we are using right now in our expansions to get to 34 MGD with a couple of revisions since then. In the early 2000s, we also saw the Pilatex closure. That was a huge drop in flow to the Rocky River plant. So we went right from the precipice of designing an expansion and implementing an expansion at that point to being really far below the need for that because of that single large flow drop there. In the 2011 timeframe, we did a re-rating study and some associated improvements at the plant. Some fairly minor things that took us from 24 to 26.5 million gallons per day. Going from there to 2019 to 2022, we did the preliminary engineering report and design for the phase 3 expansion. We just completed that in 2024. Which has brought the capacity of the plant, permitted capacity, to 30 million gallons per day. In that same time frame, we embarked on the master plan update, including future flow projections with member jurisdiction staff and development of new Rocky River water quality model, which is allowing us now to apply for an MPDES permit application for up to 50 million gallons per day. So that permit application is currently in progress. Black and Veatch is working on the environmental documentation for that right now. We are reviewing that and working with them on that. Also, in the current time frame here, we've got conceptual design for the plant expansion options beyond 34 MGD with the facilities plan that's in progress.
Tom, just a real quick question before you go to the next slide. When Pilatex closed, before they closed, do you know what the flow was right about that time, give or take?
I do not have that. I knew the absolute value for Pilatex, but not the.
We had a couple years we were in the low 20s. We were in the 2021 range.
So we get close to capacity. when
Correct.
Pilatex
And that was a
fully
24 MGD plant at the time. So the actual design, the actual expansion was designed. So there was a full expansion
were ready.
design. It was ready to go.
That's a key point. So.
Yes.
Okay. So let's say for the sake of discussion, that was 21 at its peak. We lost 7.
No, we went down.
Yeah. We
Yeah,
lost
flowed down to 7. We lost
down
13
Okay,
million.
so 13.
Total with all the
Right, okay.
meals and everything. We lost
Down
about.
to 7,
Yes,
not down 7.
yes. Is that correct?
Well, I know that Pilatex itself was around 7, so I know there were some
Okay.
other things around that same time frame.
I think it was 7 because
Okay, sorry. Yeah.
similar to that.
Sure.
Okay.
All right, so, that's give or take 10 million gallons a day between that time and where we are here that's kind of what we used really before we had to get to this most recent expansion over what's that 25 years.
Mhm.
About 10, 11 million gallons. So I guess it gives me context that we're talking about the 7 to 10 million we need is another 25 years. And maybe it's more, maybe it's less, but it's a similar kind of situation we were in 2000.
And we do have some flow projections later on from the master plan for some context there, so we can get into those then if you like.
Yeah, thank you.
Yes, sir. So a similar expansion, construction and expansion history for Muddy Creek. In 1995, the original Muddy Creek plant was a 75,000 gallon per day plant. And that's 0.075 million gallons per day, and was completed by Cabarrus County at that point. In 2011, WSACC completed an expansion to 0.15 MGD, which was doubling the original plant. And in 2019, completed another expansion to 0.3 MGD, which is where the current plant capacity is today. In 2021, we applied for and received a permit for Muddy Creek to treat up to 1.0 million gallons per day. So that'd be if we use the entire amount, that'd be 700,000 gallons more than than it's permitted for at the moment. That 2022 through 2024 timeframe was the master plan update. Again, including those future flow projections for the area served by Muddy Creek as well. And so in 2024 and 2025, this is also wrapped into the facilities plan. And what this is going to do is give us that conceptual design for alternatives beyond our current permitted capacity, our current plant capacity rather, which is 0.3 million gallons per day. So a path forward for the facilities plan. We've been talking about the facilities plan in different ways for quite a while now. The alternatives analysis workshops are a key portion of all that. So they've done, Brown and Caldwell has done a ton of background work with tons of data to get to where we are today. And looking at all that data, looking at the plant capacity analysis, looking at plant condition assessment, hydraulics, biological process modeling, everything has kind of brought us to where we are today. So in that early May timeframe, we've got 2 different alternatives analysis workshops planned, one for Muddy Creek and one for Rocky River. And coming out of that, we'll have a selected alternative or a recommended alternative to move forward from there. So when Chad talks about George coming to talk to the board in May, that will be after these workshops, and George can bring the results of that effort and answer detailed questions at that point. There are a few things that remain on the facilities plan otherwise. Chief among those is the conceptual design for the selected alternatives. They anticipate that to be completed in August of 2025. And that will include a conceptual design for each area, a cost estimate, and a projected schedule to go along with that. There are some other remaining tasks, and I apologize, the picture has ended up covering up a piece of it here with the font changes. So the other remaining task here, we've got some hydraulic model updates. We may do some stress testing for the primary clarifiers at Rocky River if needed. And then there are some draft technical memos that just need to be finalized as well. So this effort does hook in with the master plan effort. And a big part of this, where these kind of coincide with each other and work together, are the wastewater flow projections. So these are the overall wastewater flow projections from the master plan developed for the base year 2030, 2040, and 2050. We have some graphs showing those as well. In developing these wastewater flow projections, there was a community biz model in ArcGIS software, mapping software that Stewart used to do these. But key with this was coordination. We had meetings, multiple meetings with member jurisdiction staff from every member jurisdiction and every partner along the way to develop these. So these are with input from that community biz model and also from member jurisdiction staff along the way to see where we need to be for the future. And these are probably shown better in the next couple slides where they're shown on a graph. So first, a set for the Rocky River Regional Wastewater Treatment Plant. The master plan flow projections are shown in yellow here. Again, these are the flow projections from that community biz model and working with member jurisdiction staff members for that as well. So you can see kind of a sharper projected increase in that yellow line, which are the flow projections from now through 2030. And what that is it's assuming all the commercial and industrial development that's planned over this time frame happens in that early stage of things. That is kind of the starting point for all that, with some residential development in there as well, but kind of front loaded on the commercial and industrial side. And then the projections go on out to 2050 from there. And so the current plant capacity is at 30 million gallons per day. So that's that solid blue line at the bottom. The phase 4 capacity, where we're under construction currently, anticipated for completion in 2027, is 34 MGD. That is kind of the dashed line straight above that. And then for the facilities plan conceptual design, we are considering something within that green range up top. So that would be another 7 to 11 MGD on top of the 34 MGD expansion. So as far as the allocations go, the 30 million gallons per day has been allocated to the member jurisdictions. The 34 MGD is coming in the future, as that construction progresses. And then the green range up there is the 7 to 11 MGD that Chad mentioned earlier.
Chad, the slope of your flow line changes dramatically at 2030. Please share with us why you see the flow after 2030 being at a much lower rate of change than you see currently up to 2030. What's the difference?
And would you mind if I answered that? Okay. So the overall projections that Black and Veatch did with help from us and member jurisdiction staff were basically establishing that 2050 point. And everything in between was how do you get from how fast does growth happen in there and what is the shape of that line in between today and 2050? So it's front loaded with regards to the commercial and industrial component of that. And so that is that steeper line between the origin of the projections in 2030. And then after that is the remainder of the projected growth to get to the overall 2050 numbers from that.
And a lot of that had to do with direction by the member jurisdiction staff. And kind of our discussions we had among the board was the fact, because these projections were done in 22. And the discussion was we've got this pent up demand, that we've got these projects that are backed up. When capacity becomes available, there's an expectation or a concern or whatever you want to say that we'll see kind of a blast of growth when they're available to get capacity and to build. So what we wanted to do was to kind of get back in front of the wave, assume that that's going to come quick. We need to make sure we're prepared for it and have that capacity there and ready for it.
I had a slightly different take on the graph, and let me just give an alternative comment. I'm concerned that it's a little too aggressive, that we're not permitting a lot right now, and we won't be for the next few years as we've allocated pretty much all of our resources. It just feels like we've got a 5-year window that somewhere in this graph, it's gonna not be linear, it's not gonna go flat, but it's might have a dip even, and then it goes back up again when we get more capacity. It's just a feeling. I don't have any statistical backing to say that that's going to happen, but we're in a mode now that everything that pent up, we've pushed that out the door and developers are either doing it or not, but we're not permitting anything now for 26, 27, 28, 29. I mean, it's done until we have more capacity.
So
How does that affect the long term?
I guess I'm asking, we have 6,000 plus units that are already
Yeah.
permitted.
Yes.
You all have 9,000 or so. I don't know what the real number is, but I'm saying a bigger number than we have. So how does that fit into that? Are we all saying that by 2030, all of that will have been chewed up? And so therefore it then slows down based on Mike's idea that we are not permitting anything right now? I guess I don't know what changes. Why is 2030 the magic number? What happens? I mean, I realize that's 5 more years from now. So are we saying that the pent up demand is going to disappear over the next 5-year period?
Well, in 2022, we said the next 8 years, it's projected to be a higher growth rate
Okay.
because we've been holding things back. We didn't know in 22 what we know in 25. We just know what we knew then. We knew Red Bull was coming. We knew Eli Lilly was coming. We knew there was going to be a couple big slugs of growth that were coming there. At that time, lots of industry was looking at our area. So the decision was made among the group, kind of from a projection standpoint, that we would front load it some to make sure we kind of didn't stay behind. That we didn't assume it's going to be just linear and we get behind a slug of growth that came once capacity was available.
Yeah, and I don't think it's all industrial, not in.
That's why I'm saying
I
there's
think there's a
residential.
lot of residential out there that has been permitted, just hasn't been built.
Correct.
And has capacity. That's 6,000 lots you're talking about. I mean,
Yeah, and they got 9,000.
right, Harrisburg's got
Do you
some.
know what kind of capacity you have on your waiting list? Do you know?
Oh, it's 10,000 lots or. You mean,
I mean, volume, like I mean,
yeah,
we've got 1.3 million in our waiting list. 1.3 MGD sitting
I
there.
don't know what our capacity is.
Yeah, I don't know what you guys got, but I know you track it. Thomas, go back one slide, or maybe two. Or have to commute right here. So if the base year is 1.56. That's what we're saying, we're treating that now.
Yes, as of the time of the study. which-
Yeah, it was,
Right.
it was then.
Right.
Yeah,
Yeah.
right.
Yeah, a year or two ago.
But let's say,
Yeah.
roughly now. I've got about, and I forget what it is, 430, 500,000 in allocated capacity over to Harrisburg. But I've got a bunch of folks that don't have capacity that I'm just saying, I don't have capacity. If I had that 1.3 to my 1.6 there, it gets me to 2.9 today. If I had the capacity. You've got me at 3.1 in 2050. That's, something doesn't add up there. I just think that's and I've said this early on in the master planning of this, and I've said it at several meetings. It doesn't make sense to me when I look at these charts. And if you go forward on, Thomas, to the actual graph, we've got, okay, our projected flows aren't gonna meet what we currently have available until 2032. Why do we have allocations at all? We got 7 more years of capacity. If we never build another thing. Before we ever even have to worry about this, we're gonna have phase 4 done. That
But
puts
some of
us-
that, how much do you have that's permitted?
Well, I can't permit it because I don't have the capacity.
Well, we've essentially permitted all of our, in one way, shape or form. All of our capacity that's been allocated for the current expansion, or the most recently completed and the next expansion. It's all mapped out.
Right.
So we know we have a pretty good sense of what's gonna happen in the next 5 years. What happens after that is the mystery. Is if we're not permitting anything more than that number now for several years, don't we have a dip? I mean, don't we, if there's no permitting going on now, at some point, there's no building permits getting issued.
Well, I think that's
Well, there will,
Until we get capacity, and then you'll ramp up again.
that's the crux of the question, right? When that yellow line hits the 2030 blue line, it goes flat. Because that is all we have allocated out to the community. Maybe we've allocated out the 34 now. I don't remember if that was a change in the law that allowed us, but that, if we've allocated everything out to the future based on what we've currently had applied for, nobody needs to apply if this is our plan. It doesn't, we never get ahead of what we currently have being requested. And so then it goes to your question, Chad, is what is our charge to you? What level of service do we want? Are we okay as a community or as a regional partnership and saying, we're good if we can just get somehow the folks that have asked up until this point, we can get those guys their capacity, that's a win. Or is it our job to say, no, we're not supposed to be a governor on this growth. We're supposed to provide sewer treatment where sewers needed to be treated, in which that number is much higher than that, in my opinion. I don't think it's anywhere near 45. I think it blows the top of that capacity range off. If you funded everybody that you have currently, and we're just operating like we did 5 years ago, knowing that if somebody comes in, sewer and water are available, no restrictions to that, or land use, or, what have you. The only reason this is steep is because we don't have the capacity, or I'm sorry, that it's flat, is because we don't have the capacity. I think looking at what type of facility or what size facility we need to go to without understanding what the unconstrained need is foolhardy. I think you have.
And I guess that gets to a central question. Are we ratepayers in this county, you know, willing to, and the development community willing to pay for unlimited capacity. We were spoiled
How much would
during
it
the
cost?
2000s when we had all that pill tax capacity and we didn't have to pay anything for it. It just flowed. It was just there and we got to pay for it now.
Well, Go ahead, Josh. Go ahead.
I was gonna say it. I know you haven't showed the Muddy Creek numbers yet, but if you could go back one slide. Kevin?
Yes.
If I combine, and I live in the southern part of the county, but if I combine those Midland numbers, you've got Midland outgrowing everybody at a higher rate, almost 300%. Which means you guys are projecting some pretty heavy growth in that southern part of the county. And obviously we had the conversation last month from Corning, right? They want to get in on some of that extra. I feel like, and I am new at this type of thinking here, but I feel like it's still a reactionary standpoint instead of the proactive standpoint that we are framing it as, because like what Rob, you're saying, you know, if we're supposed to provide that service of sewer treatment and in return, then you know, it's not a peak efficiency machine, right? 100% efficiency on an engine, you're just never going to get that out of it. So, you know, not every area of the county is ever going to have sewer available to it, but with the growth that this chart is projecting, it's almost like a church that says, I'm going to double in size. And then by the time they get done, a year later, they're already packed out again, you know,
Schools.
or schools. Exactly. And so, but to be realistic, yeah, I mean, you could I feel like that next chart, Kevin, I mean, you could put 75 on there. And if we were being very transparent, that line would probably shoot up, you know, past the 75 million gallons per day, just based on, and I don't know, what all does Charlotte, what does Charlotte treat? What's their, and I know we're not as populated as them.
Charlotte's probably treats in the order of magnitude of 70 million,
Yeah, their capacity is.
somewhere in that neighborhood is where they treat.
Astronomically,
Yeah.
exponentially.
It's about 3 times what we do.
Right.
Um,
And my thinking is, I use examples a lot. I mean, it's just how I go through the day or whatever in ranges. So it gives me a good, you know, baseline to think about, but
3 to 4 times the population.
Correct.
yeah.
So kind of a couple points to that. Thomas, go back to the chart.
Go back to there.
I do want to point out, these are not WSAC numbers. These are each planner that represents your jurisdiction's numbers
Okay.
that worked with our consultant. WSAC didn't have input in these flow projections. This were flow projections done between our consultant and each jurisdiction with the projects that they had out there, their land use plan, what projections they had of growth. That's where those numbers came from, because WSAC, we don't have any control over land use, annexing, project approvals. We have no control over that. So those are jurisdictional numbers that came together in 22, 23 during this process, is where that came from. The other thing I want to kind of point out is that I always go back to 2007, because that's when I started at WSAC. So I have 18 years of data back to 2007. In those 18 years, we've grown 7.51 million gallons a day. Is how much the
In how many years?
18 years. This 417,000 gallons a day. The flatter line, Thomas, go to the graph. Where the line gets flatter is double that rate. So that line's saying we're going to grow at about 800,000 gallons a day per year, roughly, is where that line takes us. If you break that to Cabarrus County only, you take Charlotte water flow out, of that 7.5 MGD, Charlotte water is about 3.06 of that, and Cabarrus County is about 4.45 million gallons of that. So in 18 years, with 15 years of that being unrestricted growth, first come as you want, first come, first serve, we grew 4.5 million gallons a day in 18 years. That's not to say what we're going to grow into the future, but I think the point that we do need to be realistic about is 10, 15 million gallons of sewer capacity goes a long way. There's probably less than 15 sewer plants in the state that are bigger than 15 MGD. That goes a long way. So, that's where it comes back to. We really need to process these numbers, have these discussions, and figure out the level of service. Because at one point, we were flowing 17 million gallons a day. We had 2 million gallons of developer controlled capacity. So that capacity being utilized was 19 MGD. We were a 26.5 MGD plant. We were first come, first served. Nobody was worried about it. Everything was good. So we really need to get back to that level of work. Does it take 6 million? Does it take 8 million? Does it take 10? What does it take for us to feel comfortable that we don't have to tell developers no on projects? Where is that number? And how aggressive do we want to be on
What
that?
is that number for you?
I mean, I think the history would show that if you're in that 6 to 8 MGD range, you've got a pretty big buffer. But now with projects, the developer, I mean, each jurisdiction controlling capacity and having it in different buckets and maintaining it, that's not really, WSAC's not really necessarily the decider there, I don't believe.
I will say there's another factor to this though, that is, at least for Kannapolis and probably to Concord too, maybe not as much Harrisburg or Mount Pleasant, but, or Midland, but apartments and townhomes are I mean, that's where we're going, and those things eat the capacity fast. I mean, like overnight. 10-year build out.
Though, I mean,
We're in an urbanizing area, it's gonna happen.
you're gonna have
The
more.
statutes change.
Really
That's
gonna happen.
That's gonna be
Mandate.
an issue for us too.
Yeah.
Really good.
Because our local development authority's been able to manage that on our end, but we see that same demand. The new interceptor we put by the crossroads would be full of townhomes and apartments right now, if that law change hadn't been effective.
We're right
5
next to
years
you.
ago.
Sorry, okay, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, we would be right there.
I mean, to that end, I mean, at least it's gonna happen faster than we've ever seen it over the past 18, 20 years. I mean, when you have a subdivision and it takes 12 years to build out and it's slow and methodical, you got another one that's slow, these are boom, all the sewer, gone out the door.
I just get very uncomfortable making decisions and not knowing what the unconstrained growth is.
Well, I don't know that we could ever know that, right? So like, let's go back to that chart, Thomas. If I know we keep making you. flip back and forth.
Should have had it side by side.
Just one more time, to make sure, right? So if I'm sitting as the planner in Concord in 2022, and I'm giving you projections on what the next 20, 30, 40, going out that far. And then if I fast forward, not even 3 years later, the economics are different, the interest rate is different, because we used to have a long line of individuals that, said, hey, there's no capacity, we'll wait. Well, now they're walking, and they're not walking because we don't have capacity. They're walking because of the interest rate, or they're walking because the project won't work because of financials. And so I think we also have to remember, like, all of those factors that we have no control over, we also don't know what that's going to look like. And then throw in the legislation, like you said, on top of that. I mean, this is just like,
Crapshoot.
it's a total crapshoot.
It's gotta be better than a crapshoot.
Yeah, I mean, I would say, maybe we should put that on record.
So,
That's what we do, is to not make it a crapshoot, but
It's tough.
it's tough.
but as we sit here and most of Black and Beach did this, right?
Correct.
So, they use their, was it VisSim or whatever, the land use model and it projects these. And we had, whatever we had. I'll see what my staff sent, but that grossly inadequate, maybe it was the things that are actually permitted and not the things that are sitting there that can't be permitted.
Yours is the eye opener on that chart. I can't wrap my head around that, your numbers, so
Yeah, I mean,
that could be an anomaly that's.
like I said, we're probably at about 1.718 currently as we stand in 2025. I have, at least half of my capacity. We're at 4 something. We have like 200 on that. So I know by 2026, I'm at 2 million. I have about another 1 million that would like to have capacity, and I'm telling them, no, we don't have it. The question is, why am I telling them no? we're good, man. We've only had, we only needed 4 million over 18 years and we don't know what the economics are slowing down. Well, then let's open it up. Let me permit everybody I got, get them off the books. Jeff can permit everybody that you have on the books. Mike can permit everybody and we're good because we have plenty of flow. And then we'll see where it goes. But I know we're not going to do that because we know that that is not accurate. If we permitted everybody on our list, we'd be out of capacity tomorrow. So if we know that that's true, why are we planning as if it's not?
And I think the thing is, we know we would be out of capacity on paper very quickly. I don't know that we would be in actual treatment mode.
It'd probably take 3 or 4 years to build it out, but in that 3 or 4 years, we'd have more people coming in asking for paper capacity.
Right.
So it comes back to that 6-7 million buffer that you're talking about. Are we comfortable with 6-7 million buffer? Probably. That feels like it gets you out a decade. If something happens, but these numbers just, they leave us in the same spot. We're planning out for 2050 and saying for the next 25 years, we're not going to improve our situation. Maybe that's all we can do. Maybe it's all we can afford, but I don't.
What's the state standard that we?
75
been?
per veteran.
And these numbers, take into account, I believe, 125 gallons per house, which is about the actual flow that you see. So these are actual flow projections.
Not
Not
permitted. the
Right,
actual-
not permitted, but actual.
We're permitting a 4-bedroom at 300 gallons per day, but these numbers have it as what it's gonna actually flow at 135.
Right.
And Thomas, does water availability affect these numbers, or are you assuming this without any issue about?
That was next on my list. Yeah, I mean, so you talk about the cumulative effects to ratepayers, right? And I told Chad this, Thomas, earlier, like, this is 100% a financial discussion. Like, we can build whatever, at whatever rate, you can chase that line to 70 to 100. Like, but you've also got to be careful that you don't build 60 million gallons and it take you 30 years to realize what you built. Like, that's a horrible investment. So there could be these incremental things of, oh, we can get 2 and then we can get 5 and then we can get 5 more. But then to lay all of that on top of a potential 10-year, hundreds of millions of dollars IBT process, like, we don't have 10 million gallons worth of water left right now. It doesn't exist. Nobody has it. So the reality is, during that same time frame, we're going to be spending hundreds of millions of dollars somewhere, probably east, that is going to fall on those same ratepayers. That is going to, so I think that's an important part of the discussion of what that total impact is to our ratepayers. Not saying that keeps us from doing what we need to do. But it may be that we shoot for the middle of that line and then we reassess where we are. But to your point, Rob, I think we've got data now of these first couple of years, and we saw last month that, that permitting versus approval line has crossed over now, like I think we expected it to.
Yeah.
So I think it's going to be so important to really track, like, where we are at any given year. Are we above that line? Are we below that line? Because that adjusts where those targets are. But in my brain, the idea of going and building 40, 50 million is, I don't know how I could get there from a pure financial standpoint. And
cost benefit.
And right, well, at least in the short term, to build all of that capacity really for the sole goal of getting back to a first come, first serve, and then be right back where we are now. And it's just a tough model. But so is the model we're in.
It's gonna have to be chunks of improvements over time.
I agree.
But what is that? Is it chunks of 5? Is it chunks of 8? Is it chunks of 2?
I think that's the critical question.
That's where.
What is the chunk?
And we have some preliminary, looks at that later in the presentation as well.
I told Black and Beach a year ago, I think their projections were too low when we did the same thing at the plant. I told him that when I talked to him personally. I explained this to you and I'm gonna say it again here today. Number's too low, in my opinion. I don't know what the high number is, but I know Harrisburg's numbers are off. I know developers are furious at Concord because they weren't able to get their stuff, phase 1 and phase 2. There's lawsuits going on. Half of these bills that come through every year we gotta fend off because of our sewer allocation. So there's pent-up demand that's not shown on here. And I'm worried that that isn't accounted for. It's just kind of wiped off as it doesn't exist because we can't give it to them. So it's throttled down. We're gonna plan for the throttle down. And that's not acceptable to anybody that's trying to build in the county. And we're seeing, you know, massive attacks on land use and everything else, mostly because of it.
If I could speak to the process just in a little bit more detail here. The 2030 numbers, you know, do include that front-loaded commercial and industrial. They do include lots of residential, as well. And the 2030 numbers were developed with, the obligated flows that were already on the WSAC books, you know, as having formal flow allocation, that is. Plus the pending development for specific parcels, that staff from individual member jurisdictions knew, you know, were probable things to happen. The community biz model where that comes into this and then, you know, continuing member jurisdiction staff input throughout that. The community biz model looks at what land's available and what land is suitable for use as well. So that was the projections, you know, with a host of other factors, out to 2050 from there. So just, again, just speaking to the methodology, there that was used for that.
To Doug's point, by 2030, if this legislation goes through, this will all be multifamily anyway. So those numbers will be like 9 times that.
The good news is with multifamily with apartments, it takes about 8 or 9,000 of them to use up one MGD. So it does take a lot to use an MGD,
Yeah.
in real life. Now, on paper, it may be.
It's lower numbers.
Right, so, on paper, it may be a little more than that, but in actuality, it's less, but.
We'll be 30% multifamily by 2030 if that legislation were to pass. We're right next to the university.
You said these numbers were done prior to agreement.
It was during that process.
Do they account for
Yes.
that reality?
Yes.
Yeah, so these numbers were not intended to be constrained. We went to the planners and said, what pending development do you see? What parcels do you see as likely to develop? You know, what is your land type and land use and what's suitable out into the future? So these are intended to be without restriction, for plant capacity. They're intended to inform the need for plant capacity.
And I think it's important to know, these are intended to be a guide,
Yeah.
not the truth. They're intended to be a guide that we use as a starting point.
They could be a little high for 2030. I think. Just back of the napkin numbers based on what we have in the pipeline. I don't know. I just think it's probably a good idea. This is too important not to sort of revisit this, to Rob's point, and go back and let's do a deeper dive just to make sure these numbers do make sense for everybody based on all the factors. This is too important. I'm not saying they should change dramatically, but are we being realistic? And that gets to Jeff's point about let's not overbuild this stuff just because we had a number flashed on the screen that.
When do we think the 34 will be
27.
done? Okay, so
And that capacity will be available depending on what the board decides to do in like 25, 26.
The extra million.
And we got the extra million from Charlotte Water. So that'll be 3.4 million.
right, so next year, by the end of next year, we'll be able to allocate up to 34. These numbers say that gets us to 2040. It's gonna be really hard. Tell a developer we got 13 years of capacity sitting here, if you gotta wait. Because we're tight right now.
Well, and I think the point I was making earlier, I think we need to make sure, we need to kind of decide what is that buffer that we want to keep. So if you want to keep a 6 MGD buffer, then we're really out of capacity on a 34 million gallon a day expansion when you hit 28 or so. When you hit 27, 28 is when you're out of capacity. You're out of capacity on a 40 MGD plant when you hit 34. It's kind of the way of thinking. I threw 6 out. I don't know that that's the right number. But that's kind of what we've seen, because right now we're a 30 MGD plant. We're flowing 22. Okay. You know, we have, 2.5 million developer control. So,
Just over two, we've got just over three that's available to the jurisdiction for allocation.
so it's just where do we wanna, you know, manage
What's the
that?
peak flow right now?
Well,
Is that an easy answer, easy question to answer?
it's, so peak daily flow,
Yeah.
was in either the fifties or sixties. That is rain, that's all rainfall at that point. So that 22 million gallon per day rate, that's where.
What's more realistic peak? I mean, what's the worst case scenario over a period of time, a month or?
Well, we are judged based, or we're held to account based on the yearly average. So that yearly average is what informs what capacity is available with those 6-month updates. And that's around 22. Our max month, I think,
26.
26 or 27, somewhere in there.
So that number's around 22. We have 3 out to the jurisdictions.
There's
Yes.
3 available for allocation among all Cabarrus County jurisdictions. Right.
And then of the remaining 5, 2.5 is developer controlled.
Right, and part in Charlotte Water.
2.5 is Charlotte Water. Yes. That makes up the entirety of it. So we've got that up to 30, we've only got 3 right now,
It's not spoken for.
which goes to my, 2030 number. We're at 27 right now. We have a base year of 20. But in reality, the developer controlled his capacity. They're allowed to build it. And some are building it, some are slower than others. The jurisdiction controlled, I don't know anybody in the room that has capacity on their books that they don't have a request for. So that 3 spoken for. We're at 27 on base year.
So the 3 MGD that I mentioned is available for formal allocation with WSACC. Those have not come in as formal flow acceptance requests to us yet, but is allocated to the member jurisdiction. Right.
Yeah, and so our portion of that 3, we're not putting it in for a formal flow request until they get through the process of entitlement.
We've mapped it up.
Right.
But we have it allocated to them.
We've mapped it all
But it's
out.
gone. Yeah. That 3, that 3 spoken.
And then there'll be another 3.4 next year.
And there's for us, another 1 million on the books that is spoken for, but we don't have the application for. So that's my question. Where's, what does that look like countywide? What are you guys predicting? What do you have that you're telling people no on? I know you're telling people no on a bunch of stuff because you allocated everything quicker than most of us.
Yeah, with the exception of a buffer, which we have built in, we've allocated everything for the full 34. It
But
just,
there's a ton of people.
it's either that or just hoard it and, it's when you have demand the way it is, I mean, you just gotta allocate it. I mean, you can't hold it forever. We have held out some for economic development and some other things, but a lot.
I'd like to take a tougher look at the numbers like Mike had mentioned here, just make sure that we're doing that. You don't want to, as Jeff said, you don't want to just build out a single build in current dollars and kind of this capacity sitting there.
Especially if a recession hits.
And you,
That's another point. Yeah.
and the daily flows, from an actual treatment standpoint and stuff, because it's very, very conservative.
Yes.
And there's all of these, conservative measures built into it. It feels like, hey, we can treat all this, but if we can't permit it all, if we can't allow people to come in, I think it's a problem.
Best of all world would be to get all that paper capacity.
Yeah, it's
converted
like-
into real
It's a weird
capacity.
dynamic that the more you build, the more you have available. Like it's
Yeah.
a weird dynamic that we're in.
And it's a real big number too. I mean, we're talking about
Yeah.
a huge number.
You probably get a
Good
million-
thing.
Half of it back.
Like you say, you probably get a million gallons back.
Good thing we do through policy and decision-making can control it. Unlike schools and other growth issues, we've got no choice. The kids move here and they gotta educate them and they gotta have space. We have the ability to manage this if we do it right. So Thomas, why don't you go ahead and roll on and there's probably more discussion.
Sure. So if it's all right, I'll roll past this one to the graph from Muddy Creek. All right, so here's a corresponding graph for Muddy Creek. It shows current Muddy Creek capacity, 0.3 MGD there. And then the capacity range considered so far for the facilities plan conceptual design being 0.6 to 1.0 MGD total there. So again, the yellow line is with, a combination of the pending development, the obligated flows already, input from planning staff with Midland, and then the community viz model looking at suitable and available land out into the future. I'll move past this, if that's all right, into a couple of, I believe the next thing is a couple of options. So again, this was really pretty before it came to this computer. I apologize. So wanted to show several things on this slide. This slide shows the existing wastewater treatment plants. One, at Rocky River Regional, kind of in the center of the county. Muddy Creek wastewater treatment plant down towards the southern portion of the county. The other thing that this shows, one other thing, is the current WSACC pump stations. So it does not show all the member jurisdiction pump stations. For example, Concord, Kannapolis have a ton. Does not show those, just shows our main pump stations that we have, 3 in Mount Pleasant, 1 at Reedy Creek, 1 at Lower Rocky River. The different colored lines along the WSACC interceptors here are the conveyance projects, the pipe projects, improvement projects that Black and Veatch identified during their master planning effort all the way out to 2050 for various projects in different areas. So you can see just different segments in different areas. We're working on the BC01 project as one example right now, and on the Lower Cottle Creek project, which does not show up in this picture because it was already in progress at the point of the master plan being developed. So the other thing that this slide shows, and again, not as well because the text and the arrows just did not line up very well in the final version, but shows different expansion options that are available at each place right now. At Muddy Creek, for example, we've got a permit up to 1.0 MGD. That could be expanded in phases. That could go to 0.6, that could go to 0.8, it could go all the way up to 1.0 MGD with the permit that we have in hand currently. At the Rocky River, we've got a current capacity of 30 MGD. Our phase 4 expansion, which is construction in progress, is taking us to 34 MGD. And there's a couple of options there and further options beyond these, but the couple of initial options there are a 36 MGD plant, which is basically an optimization of the existing plant after phase 4. And we're able to see the actual capacity of some of those items and what that may be able to get us there. Beyond that, we're adding entire new sets of basins at the Rocky River plant. So there is the incremental expansion beyond that 2 MGD, which is an optimization step. There's probably some construction work with that 2 MGD step, but the incremental steps beyond that are in 9 MGD chunks, if you will. So that's, going from 2 to 11 is 9 additional MGD. That's a whole new set of basins out at the Rocky River plant. We've also discussed the options for a couple satellite facilities. A couple that Brown and Cobble has looked at in some detail are the Mount Pleasant option being 0.75 to 1 MGD out there, kind of handling the Mount Pleasant flow, taking some load off of the Rocky River plant and the pump stations there. And then a potential grounds at Concord option. Lots of industrial users in that area, some existing flow that's pretty substantial as well. We're doing some flow metering out there right now to quantify that a little bit better. But that looks like that could be a 2 to 4.5 million gallon per day plant out there. That plant could have the possibility for some reuse. We talked about that with Muddy Creek last time relative to Corning. That plant could have some reuse possibilities relative to the industries in that area. So that's got some IBT implications and all that sort of thing. So these are just some preliminary options, here that are being considered overall. Again, this is just kind of to present this, for an initial look. George will have some more information on each option, for the May meeting. But I'd be happy to take any questions on these general options at this point.
I just got an educational question.
Yes.
So, and I apologize, I called you Kevin earlier.
That's all right.
I'm sorry. Sorry, Kevin.
Not to be offended.
So Muddy Creek currently is one MGD
It's
permitted,
It's currently,
permitted.
yes, we have a permit to go all the way to one.
Right.
Yes, sir.
Operates at 0.3. It's permitted to go up to 1 if it was expanded in that capacity.
It is built to 0.3. It is permitted to 1.
Right.
Yes, sir.
How soon do you consider increasing your permit? In the whole realm of expansion, and because, you know, you're looking at sort of the growth up at potentially in Mount Pleasant. Obviously, there's that huge swath down there in that corner. And we talked about hydraulic pressure and stuff last month about Corning's water usage, but how soon do you look at, and Doug would know better about whatever growth is projected totally in that part of the county, but with the school on the horizon, with the growth, Carolina Ridge, right, that's 1,100 homes or something that are being built, that's going to Rocky River as well. I know a couple of the big national guys own some big swaths of land, 102 acre, plots out there. How soon do you look at, okay, we're still going to operate where we're at, and talk about the expansion, but maybe that needs to go to a 1.5 MGD permit. And then and obviously you're doing that in parallel with everything else, but sort of when does that conversation?
Sure. So for your permit application, the state wants to see evidence that you are heading towards that point. So at the time that we got the 1 MGD permit, that was kind of the justifiable threshold to go to.
Gotcha.
At that point beyond point.
That was a fight, though.
Yes, it
They
was.
did not want to give us more than 650,000 gallons, and that was a fight to get the 1 MGD.
Right.
I'll say fight, but it was,
Well,
it was a back and forth.
They're not just gonna, randomly permit numbers and stuff. They
Right.
have basis for it.
So, for example, the permit request at Rocky River currently, that we're currently in the middle of, which we would have done a similar process for Muddy Creek at that time. The permit request is currently to 50 MGD.
Gotcha.
That's not saying you can't go beyond that, but
Right.
there's a reasonable threshold where they'll say no beyond that.
Understood.
At least not right now,
Okay.
is the answer.
Kind of a good rule of thumb is you don't want to be utilizing all the permit that you have in hand. So if you are expanding to maximize the use of your permit, it's a good time to be getting a bigger permit, because that is a 3, 4, 5, 6 year period.
Right, because if the range of 0.3 to 0.7 MGD expansion down there, I mean, if you realize, a true 0.7 MGD capacity, now you're really bumping up against that ceiling. It's like, okay, so just thinking ahead as far as.
But let's go back to that previous slide. But if the numbers are correct, that has been shared with Black and Veatch, you would go, if we decided we were going to go to 0.6, not all the way to 1 million, but 0.6, you would have enough capacity till 2044, 2043, based on what we see up there. So I'm assuming that somebody representing the southern part of the county, either Midland or Concord's estimate of what's needed in that region, was the numbers that were used to calculate that curve that is there. And if you go more than 0.6, I guess that's the point I'm making, Josh, is the point that Chad was asking us about.
Right.
If we go to 0.6, we're creating 20 years of capacity just to go to 0.6, because we're at 2025 now. And if it's 2043 or 44 before you get all of 0.6 consumed, you're creating a lot of banked up capacity that couldn't be used for 20 years.
Right. That was kind of my, another question I had was, currently, if I'm correct, Midland is the only one that goes to Muddy Creek, is that correct?
Yes.
Is there,
County, yeah,
and it's unincorporated
But that area.
service area as well? I mean, does another town, does Mount Pleasant say, okay, you know, can we go down there too? To use up some of that, and that helps offset some of the other.
I think through engineering, those
Yeah.
possibilities. I don't think Thomas has explained any of those nuances.
Right, and I might be getting way into the
No,
weeds
no,
too
I think
early,
that's,
you know, but as far as like you're saying, and I agree with you, because you don't want, you know, one area to have so much capacity and it's sitting not doing anything with it, the rest of the county's starving. And you need, so can you?
Well, we couldn't afford it.
Right.
That's,
Yeah.
that's the point that Jeff has made.
I do think too, I mean, I think it's fair to say there's just as much uncertainty about this yellow line as it is the other yellow line, right? I mean, it's probably maybe even worse. Because the percentage increase with one or two of these large tracks going is just magnified based on the flows they got. So like a couple projects could double what you've had for the last however long you've been around, right? So
Yeah, I mean, I think one big
it-
project could double the town.
Absolutely.
Residents.
Absolutely.
You know?
Yeah.
And there's another dynamic, in that we've been constrained due to water supply.
Yep.
It is an issue that has been fixed now. And you're absolutely right. I mean, 300,000 gallons per day. How many homes is that?
Um,
600?
that would be, what would that be, Thomas? 300,000 gallons. That'd be about 1,500 to 2,000.
Yeah, I mean,
Something in that order of magnitude.
three or four.
Everybody's afraid to get out the calculator.
Yeah.
I mean, Midland's residents.
So
what?
that is not gonna be 20 or 30 years worth of.
But if something changes,
What'd you get,
if
Tom?
something changes, you're not gonna build 1,500 houses overnight. It's gonna take a decade
1,000
to
homes.
get 1,500 houses built.
75.
And I mean, that's the point I'm making, Josh, is that if you've got 1,500 houses, you put that on paper.
Right.
You know it's gonna take 6, 8, 10 years for those 1,500 houses to get built, the process. So then, how much really do you need as we go through this process? And I know we've talked about, is it 0.6, 0.7, 0.8? Maybe the number is, we only need 0.4 or 0.5
Well, what do you?
if we're going to have to pay for it.
Right, so. Doug, and I referenced Carolina Ridge project, it's 1,100 homes or something. What's their timeline, do you think? Have they,
5 years.
so in 5 years, they're projecting to build out all 1,100 houses, right? So, you know, and that's only one, right? And I don't know sort of what the unused land area is in the rest of the county. I know in that part of the county, there's large swaths of farmland that, you know, everybody, if it's green, you know, they might be interested in selling it. So if it's the right amount of green, right? So.
part of our challenge is, and especially in a situation like Muddy Creek, is it's not always about when it impacts the system, it's when you permit it. Developers have to make the call to do a project or not do a project, and they can't do a project if they know, well, we'll give you half and we'll talk about the half later. So you almost have to bank on having the full capacity. But then we got to reconcile that with how it actually impacts the system. And there's got to be a creative way we can get to we all borrow each other's capacity and move it around and shift it based on permitting versus the reality. That's complicated, but
And Jennifer's point of
we got to get to it.
interest rates being high and all that kind of stuff, does that slow the process down? What is anticipated to be 3, 4, 5 years build out, is that gonna be 6, 7, and 8 year build out because interest rates are messing
Well,
it up?
even if a tariff impacts Canadian lumber, and it might be a 1-year delay in building the project, but how much that's gonna compound in delays
Yes.
as well.
Well, there's also a matter of just cost scale, going from 1.3 million off that project is an order of magnitude lower than going from 34 to 45 in the Rocky River. We're talking maybe 11 to 15 in Midland versus several 100,000 at the Rocky River. I mean, several 100 million at the Rocky River.
Physically,
So I mean, it's just, the scale is just on, I mean, the Muddy Creek expansion, whether it's 0.6, 0.7, or a million, is such a minimal project versus the Rocky River plant. I mean, the Rocky River plant expansion to 45 is a monster. That is a monster project.
Unless something like Josh is suggesting, is there some place in the other boundary that could be redirected down into Muddy Creek for a 3, 4, 5 year period of time until some of these other things get built along the way? I mean, is that possible, as Josh is suggesting? Is there, do you take out some of the capacity out of Rocky River by shifting some things in the lower area down to Muddy Creek so that it makes sense to build 0.6?
Or even a million.
Yeah, or even a million?
Well,
Does that make any
if you-
sense?
If you shift what has been discussed privately to the Muddy Creek plant and only take it to 6 or 7, you will put us back to where we are today.
If you go to a million, that may
And
make sense.
getting the 11 million from the state will have the purpose of that would have just been to open up capacity to Rocky River plant. And that is not an ideal situation for us.
Jeff, Doug, do you guys believe that in 2050 you'll only be at 0.7 MGD?
I mean, I don't, I mean, to me, that's the beautiful part of Doug sitting here. Is because that's what, that's what we've all had, that's what the other line was. We've all had to figure out what that looks like, and are we ever right? We're never right. Like that, that business is never right, but we just hope we're close enough or hope it averages out to where we're ready. But I do think, as we're rolling across this line, tracking where, I mean, maybe Muddy Creek is a bad example because we know we got to do something sooner rather than later, but we have the ability to adjust those decisions whenever we want, right? If something big happens and we need to react quick, and we'll have that permit page or whatever. We may be in that same situation where it's just about building it. I mean, now that takes a while, but we don't have to wait for those lines to start to intersect, and we can track the reality of where is that yellow line today? Where did we think it was going to be? Where actually is it? And if we have a dip, we have a dip. If we have a spike, we have a spike, and we can react to those, react to all of those situations. We also have to have those options in front of us though, right? And I think we've got options at Muddy Creek, we've got options at Rocky River, we got options at some other sites that it's putting those pieces together in a schedule that somehow gets us step by step.
To that point, Jeff, in a perfect world, and this really isn't that complicated. We almost need a laundry list of those that we can pursue, which projects we can pursue. Obviously, cost is a driver, but time is the bigger driver. If we can get 2 million gallons a day out of a project in 24 months, developers can work with that. They from beginning to end, project's going to take 18 months for them to break ground potentially. As long as we make the decision and we move forward with, so having incremental options that we can sort of, not say be totally reactive, but have a game plan, but not overbuild, build to suit almost. Obviously you do, a $9 million expansion at Rocky River. We know that time frame is big and long and cumbersome, but all these other ideas, not so much.
Yeah, so Thomas, if you jump back to the map. So if we take a look at this, and like I said, Georgia's gonna be coming with a lot more that we can get into the weeds of some of these options look like and everything. We can kind of have in the back of our head, it's $30 to $40 a gallon to build capacity, somewhere in that order of magnitude. Maybe you get lucky and it's 28, but it's in that $30 to $40 a gallon to build that capacity. The 2 MGD beyond 34 at Rocky River is obviously a no-brainer. That's something that we should move forward on. That's going to be probably the quickest, cheapest, easiest capacity that we're gonna get, and George will be able to talk in more detail about that. The good thing about considering a project out towards the grounds at Concord in that area, somewhere in that area, it's really, in my mind, kind of twofold. One, we talk about the water. Water came up, okay? Reuse is going to have to probably have a function in our communities at some point in time. That doesn't necessarily mean in my mind that we have purple pipe systems everywhere. But I think if we strategically have options where we have some big users that are running reuse water through chilling towers and using up, say 1 million gallons a day cumulatively in summertime when peak chilling demand is and peak water need is, then that's a win-win. The other thing up at the grounds at Concord with putting a sewer like that, a plant like that directly alongside an existing active sewer, then you can immediately load that plant with a significant amount of capacity. You're not building a 3 MGD plant and hoping in 25 years you're treating 2 MGD. You're building a 3 MGD plant and you're probably treating 2.5 MGD within a couple months. And that would be capacity that would directly come off Rocky River, the pump station into Rocky River, and be available to support growth. That's a big advantage to looking at a project like that. Also, it is as we saw with phase 3, it's a satellite project. It would be a new project at a new site that, a contractor can come in and just hit it. They're not trying to do what we're doing in phase 4 of expanding an existing plant and the challenges and things that come along with that. So we do have kind of a multitude of options here. The other option is we go to the 36 and then we jump straight to 45. That creates a lot of capacity, big money, big project. But we have to always realize that's an option that really gets us out there in a big, huge chunk of capacity. But then you've got to look at the water issues, school issues, everything else that comes along with that growth that would come with that. So this was purely meant to be a primer to get you guys thinking about what's coming. So we're not sitting here with our engineer going through a detailed presentation and everybody's heads just spinning around all of these challenges. I would encourage, as you think through this in the next couple of weeks, if you want to sit down and have lunch with me and Thomas, we could talk through stuff. I didn't really understand this, or we didn't really talk about this. Please do, because honestly, for Thomas and myself, designing and building this stuff's the easy part. That's what we do. That's what we love to do. It's making these decisions on what's the right time, what's the right size, how much is too much money, how much, those are the big decisions that are so tough to make. And I just want everyone to feel like they have the data and information that they need to feel like we're making as good a decision as we can at the time. So not trying to cut discussion off there. Obviously, if there's more discussion, we can continue, but
Do you have any more slides or information?
I've got one more that shows the southern portion of the county. It shows the same options. So, and I'm a little afraid given the graphic quality so far. If you call or talk to us, we can share a better version of this because I promise it exists.
It reminds me of college when the graphics like this were just coming out.
Yes.
How bad they were.
Josh, I did have a little more input for your question. As far as pursuing future permits farther out, so far we have, for example, when we started the construction process to get to 34 MGD, we said, all right, this is, we need a permit beyond 34 MGD at Rocky River. So that's where it takes a while to get all those wheels in motion, all the environmental documentation, all that, but we've been actively pursuing that. And that's where that 50 MGD effort is headed now, for the permit to 50. That's not saying we have to build to 50, it's just anywhere within that. Similar with Muddy Creek, once we got to 0.3 MGD built capacity at the site, that was 2019, 2021, we had a permit for 1 MGD. So our intent is to always be a step ahead of where we're trying to build. Yes, sir.
Okay. To ignite further conversation for next time. And I've already explained this to you. I brought this up at last time. When I look at this map, and I'll bring it up after I've kind of digested all this. Let me take WSACC hat off and put my jurisdiction hat on here.
We don't do that here.
Right, I understood. I look at Mount Pleasant's getting a wastewater treatment plant potential on here that I need to consider. We need to consider Muddy Creek getting an expansion in the southern portion. The grounds economic development site, let's throw a treatment plant there so we can do more there. I brought up extending an interceptor into our economic development, Moorhead West area. That was a bridge too far. So when I look at this, I think, okay, that doesn't feel great. See a plant here, a plant here, a plant here. Hey, can we get, no, we don't do interceptors out to those areas. So I think that has to be considered. When you look at this as a whole, is there an equity going on? When we
I
look
mean,
at
all that Rocky River flow that you free up, though, we have an allocation process to do that. Like, that's not just 2 million sitting there for Concord to use. That would, we'd take that 2 million off of Rocky River and that would be reallocated.
60% back to Concord, 30% to,
I mean,
still in the same spot.
Agree on.
But Concord pays 60% of that cost, or it gets tricky when, you know, to the, you know, Muddy Creek, we got a bunch of state money to do that. You might get developer money to do some of this. So that gets trickier when you start saying, well, which developer paid and, you know, so.
Right, well, I'm
to your
saying,
point, we got to think through all that.
I see your point, Rob. I really.
it's not just an allocation issue.
Yeah, right.
This is an economic development issue when you're trying to locate
Yes.
these sites. I said, well, we're only gonna locate them in these places where we put new plants. Don't worry, we'll take all that off and you'll get 10% of it. That's a hard sell back to a community and saying, okay, it's been easy this far.
Yeah.
We've all been able to share really with equal equity, but I certainly look at it and again, everybody else wouldn't have that. I'm 1 of 9. Everybody else is getting something here but from a Harrisburg standpoint, we were looking at a very small project and it was like, no, we don't really do that. But we could build a plant here, and a plant here, but not an interceptor.
Well, let me reopen that interceptor door as well, because Mike, you said, well, that arrangement that Mayor and I had a discussion on previously may not make sense at 7, but maybe it makes sense at $1 million. Well, that would involve an interceptor on our end. So does WSACC pay for that interceptor to open up the flow that's going to the Rocky River plant, or is that state money for that interceptor? So what is the discussion been there?
I think we do, based on what both of you just said, we do have a policy discussion that we got to start talking about too. In addition to the engineering side and the money side, there's an equity policy decision that we do have to decide. You know, Kannapolis, full disclosure, we've got a study going on with the town of Landis, sewer capacity, and probably not a WSAC thing. We probably pay for that separately, but you know, there's a lot of moving parts to all this that we need to sort of understand collectively. So
I think that's just food for thought. I'm not saying any of these are bad. I'd love to build all these and I don't know what the price is.
yeah,
Right. But I'd like a treatment plan in our Moorhead West. That way I can continue all my economic developments out there, but I don't have it. I can't even get an interceptor out there.
Yeah.
So if I want to do that, the town needs to outlay that. That needs to be 100% borne by the cost of Harrisburg, which if that's what we gotta do, that's what we gotta do. I don't see that same treatment in every other section of town. People want to bring it up.
We're talking about on our end, that'd be 6 miles worth of interceptor,
I think it was quite that far, but I think it was more like 3.5 or something.
3.5 miles.
I think it was, I think that's what I'm remembering, but I don't remember exactly.
our model has been easy to date, but maybe it's not easy going forward, as easy as it has been. So that's a good point. Okay, well, good job. I thought this was helpful, at least as a precursor to a bigger discussion, not only next meeting, but probably several meetings. We're going to have to spend the time to dive into this and keep diving into it till we get it right. So appreciate everybody's patience and staff's work. All right. If there's no other questions on that or comments, we'll move on. Updates, Ed?
I think we talked enough. I actually don't have anything this month. So, I don't have anything this month, so.
Good man.
Thomas, are you going to give us the same kind of courtesy to be brief?
That's up to the board. I'm happy to be- whichever piece. We'll
No.
move through this quickly.
Go ahead and give us an update.
Yes, sir. So this is an overall capital improvement project update for projects we've been working on, following similar ones in past months. And so we'll just move straight into the meat of it here. Our phase 3 expansion update. Completed a lot of work last month related to the gravity thickeners. Those are almost ready to start up. You can see the interceptor building progress is moving along in this upper left-hand corner. That is making room for some phase 3 pieces that need to go where the interceptor building is right now. So that's good that that's moving along. They will continue with the interceptor building next month, continue some rehab work at the primary clarifier 6. They are hopefully gonna finish up everything with the new gravity thickeners. We're gonna start those up in the next couple weeks here. And then complete final inspections for that brick building there, which is thick and sludge pump station number 2. So phase 4 expansion, we are heavy into the middle of this one. A lot of the work is within the existing aeration basin. So we are forming and pouring some new anoxic basins out there. But Crowder's doing a lot of work inside the basins to convert those as well and provide more capacity in those as well. So a lot of work with the DAF building here. You can see it in the upper left or upper right-hand corner, excuse me. The building will be built around that equipment. The upper left-hand corner is the new equalization tank. That's a 12 million gallon equalization tank. And that little yellow speck in the middle is a yellow safety vest with a person inside of it. So you can get an idea for the size of that facility. They're going to continue on that equalization tank. Get started with the shotcrete there and all that. Continue all their work at the aeration basins, primary and secondary clarifiers, RAS pump stations along the way. So it's really moving along well for that work. Lower Cottle Creek parallel, we are continuing to work with Gavin Dorn and our contractor RH Price on that work. They have installed about 1,000 linear feet of 48-inch pipeline to date. So they were finally able to get moving with delivery of some manholes, and that looks to be going well. So they're going to continue installation of that 48-inch pipeline and some relocations of the adjacent 30-inch pipeline where they have to make room for the 48 coming through there. Back Creek is a project that extends from, it's a parallel system up to Hickory Ridge Road. So that's about 7,900 feet of the parallel 36-inch sewer. We finally did get notice of award approved by the state, which was big. We have that ARPA funding, so the state has to do that for us before we issue these purchase orders. We've issued several purchase orders. We are working to issue the purchase order and notice to proceed to the contractor and then to start field work with that contractor. They're anxious to get started and moving out there. Master plan and MPDES permit application update. We finalized a couple of the dashboards for Black and Veatch. And then the main effort recently has been this engineering alternatives analysis, which is part of the main piece of the environmental documentation that goes in to support that new permit limits application for up to 50 MGD at the Rocky River plant. This is a 600 and something page document. We are currently reviewing it and compiling comments to get back to Black and Veatch. The treatment, wastewater treatment facilities plan and preliminary engineering report. You can see here a list of technical memos that we have reviewed over the past month here. Again, the next steps we've talked about already with regards to the alternatives analysis workshops and then the conceptual design moving forward from there. And the inflow and infiltration study, HDR has provided all the memos for that work. They are working to finalize their memo on the I&I management planning recommendations. And they are also finalizing their GIS-based dashboard for this work to help us track ongoing implementation of study recommendations. And we're going to work with WSACC partners to compile annually, probably, those updates so that we can see the progress of I&I rehab work reflected on those maps over time. And then Kevin brought the Rocky River Sewer Rehab project to you earlier this evening, and that relates to that project.
Any
Take any questions?
questions for Thomas? Okay, hearing none. Thank you, Thomas. We will open the floor up for any public comments. Anybody like to speak to the board on any topic? Okay, hearing none, we will move on and we need a closed session. Do I hear a motion going to closed session under GS 143-318-11 A1 and A4?
Second.
Got a motion and second, any discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, motion carries. We will stand in closed session.